himself, but we're very happy to have him today, and we thank him for coming. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mike. Much appreciated. It's a great honor to be here with you all today. I'm the executive director of the Timber Framers Guild. The Timber Framers Guild is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. In the bookstore here, I see a couple of names of the founders of the Timber Framers Guild, Jack Sobin, Ted Benson, some folks that have written some of the early and kind of foundational books in the American timber framing revival. I've also heard the name Ed Levin mentioned here, so I think especially here in the Northeast as woodworkers, there's a lot of crossover in our communities, and this is the first time that I've spoken from guild to guild, from nonprofit to nonprofit. And it's been fantastic to not have to edit my slide deck down and try to bend it into the shape of something that would be interesting just for engineers or something like that. So, yeah, I much appreciate it. It's been a wild year since returning from, or a couple of years since returning from France, and going around and kind of leaning in on the story of the work that I took part in there, and in primarily to support the traditional trades, in trying to lean in on encouraging people to support young people in their paths in the trades. And it's a real honor again to be here with you all. So I hope the screen kind of stops flashing there, and as much as telling the story of Notre Dame, I want to share the story of the Guild and how one carpenter from the United States ended up taking part in that work. It's a question I've asked myself a great deal. There were about 8 or 9 Americans in total working on the project, many of them from the Northeast. My trajectory started in the Pacific Northwest at a workshop called the Cascade Joinery, building custom timber homes. At one point in time, I visited the James Krenoff School. I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to go into to fine woodworking or timber framing, but I think maybe as a big person and as somebody who enjoys building big three-dimensional things where the engineering is incredibly obvious, I ended up leaning in on timber framing. The Timber Framers Guild every year has a couple of community building projects. We also have rendezvous. We have the Heartwood School in Alstead. Year after year, we've come together at the Griswold Scout Camp, and every year we leave with a nice little timber frame behind there. The Heartwood School sees about 600 registrations a year. Folks from all over the country come and join us there. In the Pacific Northwest, starting out, I was pretty much always doing custom homes, new construction. And as an apprentice in the Timber Framers Guild, my first opportunity to take part in working on something old, doing it was a reconstruction of a 17th century synagogue in southeastern Poland. And it was just while the Nazis were making their way across southern Europe, they were burning all of these structures in their paths, and a young couple from the University of Warsaw found out and went down and did a very detailed documentation of one that is currently in southwestern Ukraine, but which was Poland at the time. This was in concert with the, maybe you're familiar with the organization Hands House Studios, which was associated with Mass Art. And the Timber Framers Guild brought about 20 experienced timber framers, and Hands House brought a good 60 or so young people and students who were mostly engaged in studying anything from jewelry making to metal casting, etc. But they got to get out there with us and learn how to do traditional construction in a traditional environment. So on this site, we hand-hewed about 200 silver fir logs, and using basically strings and sticks, and leaning in as much as we could on medieval methods, we did a reconstruction of a 17th century synagogue that is currently installed in the Museum of Polish Jews in Warsaw. This project brought folks from all over Europe who were excited and interested in learning. Currently installed in the Museum of Polish Jews in Warsaw on the site of the Warsaw Uprising. Some other introductions for me to restoration work was a reconstruction and restoration of some windmills on the furthest westernmost point of Estonia. Again, a group of folks coming from all over the world, from Japan and from Austria and Korea and the States, getting together and spending 10 days learning from one another, learning each other's layout methods, learning each other's measurement methods, and coming together to wrap our heads around something really unique. And at the end of the project, being able to turn the blades on a windmill was incredibly gratifying. I try to express to folks that in the traditional trades, in timber framing, unless you know what a mortise and tenon is, you need to go back to the beginning. And so learning in the construction, in the custom construction field and building new things also teaches us how these things are constructed, and then also how to repair them. And this was where I was when I, along with the design office that I was in, on April 15th, 2019, we were all sitting at our computers working on SketchUp and doing drafting and putting together estimates and whatnot. And the news that Notre Dame was on fire kind of came through the office, and we all set down what we were doing in shock. My wife says I should put a trigger warning on this. But I think we've all seen it before.
That way I don't record both.
In the fire that occurred there, we all saw the forest of Notre Dame, 11th century, 12th, 13th century, dense, heavy timber work, burning very rapidly. The spire, the flèche, the arrow of Notre Dame, very much a iconic center of the Parisian skyline, burned, and here we were with the aftermath. At the time, the spire was being assessed for repairs. Organization called Friends of Notre Dame had raised funds to support investigation of the roof structure to see if everything was okay up there, and it was thought that either some electrical equipment up there or possibly a worker's cigarette. They don't know still to this day, and probably never will at this point be able to really put their finger on what caused the fire. But between the fire and the water that was used to put out the fire, the arrow, the flèche, caused also extensive damage as it toppled and crashed through the center crossing of the transept and the stone arch there. At this time, there was a lot of conversation going around about how it would be reconstructed, whether or not the skills existed to reconstruct it, whether or not the materials existed to reconstruct it. There was a design competition that was never really sanctioned by the French government, but even in our offices, we saw people coming in with hand-drawn ideas that they had that they wanted us to fully render for them in hopes that their idea would be the idea chosen for the reconstruction. Right about this time, an organization called Charpentiers Sans Frontières, Carpenters Without Borders, was doing a workshop up in Sedgwick, Maine. And they were coming together with the Timber Framers Guild to teach their layout method of scribing, or kind of lofting, where the information is drawn on the floor and brought up onto the material using strings and plumb bobs. And we were teaching them the American tradition of square rule layout and timber framing. Yes, Mike?
I saw there that Mortise and Tenon magazine. How are they involved?
This is a blacksmith shop that is part of their educational endeavors up on their property. Yeah, so they hosted the whole thing.
Did Joshua go with you to Europe?
No, he did not. No. So this, again, was a fully hand-hewn structure used, centered to learn from one another. For the French, our approach of square rule and timber framing, where you have irregular material and you're making regular reductions in order to understand how long this piece should be from the wall to that the post there could be fully round or anything. But we, in the American tradition, it's very much an American of American origin, is to be able to lay out and cut all of our pieces on sawhorses, and we know that how they all come together. In the French method, everything that's cut has to go exactly back into the orientation that it was laid up in. And working with these French carpenters who are very, every year they do an international project, and the founder of it is the past director of antiquities for the region of Normandy, and they're all very well connected, and they all know a lot about the French process. And they were all absolutely convinced that it would be reconstructed traditionally with traditional materials. And so it was with that I came back to my office and continued to see these big ideas about how Notre Dame would be reconstructed coming through, many of which were grandiose, and they got very silly very quickly. And thankfully, those conversations were soon put to bed. As Charpentier Sans Frontières, I returned to France and immediately began the work of showing that the skills did indeed exist. They were working on truss number 7. I'll delve into it just a little bit further later, but one of the architects in charge of the project, Rémy Fremont, who was right under Philippe Villeneuve, as part of his graduate work in the process of becoming a French monument architect, had about 5 years prior to the fire gone in with headlamps and friends and done very detailed drawings of all of the trusses in the roof of Notre Dame. Yeah.
What kind of wood was originally used, and what kind of wood did you use? Did you use the same as what was originally used?
It's white oak. It's a French oak, and its closest American neighbor is white oak. I don't know the scientific name offhand, I'm sorry to say, but it's very similar to American white oak with just a little bit of a increase in its structural properties. On the American side, we saw this. We saw our friends over there doing something really cool, and we wanted to do something in solidarity with them without any understanding of what the finished product would be. We asked if we could also have a drawing of a truss, and they gave us truss number 6. And that instigated the Notre Dame de Paris Truss project that we came together on the National Basilica in Washington, D.C., as well as the National Mall, along with students from the North Bennett Street School, America's oldest trade school there in Boston, a fantastic program, as well as young folks from Mass Art. We got to make a hilarious mess on the lawn of the National Basilica there. In that tent over there at the end of every day, we were drinking beer and hanging out in the tent, and we'd have deacons and stuff walking by and saying, "Hey, you guys are doing all right." There was a whole day where previous days' thunderstorms had knocked the power out, and at the end of the day, somebody came out and apologized that there had been no power, and none of us had any idea. Again, using period tools and period methods to not just reconstruct a thing, but to work on getting our hands side by side with the hands of the original makers and getting our finding their mindset by laying out. You can see there on the left, the gentleman using a plumb bob to carry the layout lines through the various pieces, and using the original straight edge string. And again, just a highly engaged learning environment. North Bennett Street School had their graduation there on our sawing trestle. And there's a shot of Michael Burry, the instructor for that program there, who I spent 3 months working with in France. Here we are. This is a shear leg. That is not the truss itself. That is part of the lifting mechanism for the truss. Really fun to be able to raise this thing more than once, actually, entirely by hand. The Historic Preservation Training Center, the National Park Service joined us as well and helped us get access to the National Mall. Really, really fun and exciting thing to be able to take part in. Yes, sir?
Did you cut it green?
Yes, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. It was all cut green. That oak was from Virginia. As mentioned, we had no idea. It was certainly an exciting idea that it might be able to be included in the reconstruction. At that time, they hadn't fully mapped out or had understood what the trusses were landing on or what the dimensions were of everything. So there was a lot of work to be done there yet. The Guild has had projects where folks from all over the country or all over the world each made a piece and brought them together. That's much more in alignment with square rule layout and is not really actually possible to do with scribe work.
So you built it here and shipped it to France?
No, I'll cut to the end of that. At the end of the day, the French were very adamant that it be reconstructed entirely with French oak. So that is the last place it stood was on the lawn behind the Fenimore Fine Art Museum, just in Cooperstown there on Lake Otsego. Stood there all summer and was a really dramatic, beautiful thing to have side by side with their Marie Cassatt exhibit, and it made for a really, really pleasant summer in Cooperstown. Yes, sir.
Any differences between the lumber that went into the reconstruction and the original lumber?
The species would have been the same. I would imagine that, as would have been the kind of the standard in earlier construction, you would have chosen the smallest tree possible that fit the required scantlings, because it's all handwork. So you're hand hewing everything. And ideally, if you're hand hewing something, you have a little bit of wane left on everything. If you're hand hewing something and it has pure crisp edges everywhere, then the material that you were hewing was way too big because you put in a lot more work than what was necessary. So at this stage in the project, still everybody is just a volunteer. Kind of typical with guild projects. In our community builds, we will compensate fairly a handful of instructors who are shuttering their shops and everybody else is a volunteer. Yep. And depending on the costs of food and lodging, sometimes those volunteers, and depending on the partner as well. It all depends on the situation. But the Guild runs a couple of community building projects every year, and typically, the partner is gaining community engagement, and they do that best if they are prepared somehow to provide a place for young people to camp, feed a whole slew of people. Feeding 60 people for a week is actually a really Herculean task. So some folks are really ready to do it, and others are like, whoa, no, we need to just pay a professional timber framer. So at this point, it is the Catholic University. We were staying on site there. So this is still pretty early in the project. Yes, sir.
So in the reconstruction, once more, is it like a beam or something where we couldn't find a tree that big? Like that issue does not?
That issue does not exist, no. The trees came from all over France. In February, we ran a tour in Normandy and visited a Knights Templar grain storehouse, tithe barn, and the couple that were the caretakers of that barn, because nobody really gets to own something that's 1,000 years old, but the couple that were caretakers of that barn were incredibly proud to be able to say that one tree from Notre Dame came from their property. And that's kind of the story throughout France. People were very, very excited to have people walk their property. And there were, of course, also some very large stands. I mean, at one point in time, oak would have been part of your national security. Having large stands of oak would have been everything from, that's all ships, that's bows, that's siege warfare, all of that. And with the improvement in making things from metal, that whole stockpile suddenly lost its relevance in the. So I'm not saying that all of the trees came from forests that were intentionally planted for that, but there certainly are forests that were. To your point in question about whether anything was different, and I'll get to it. The Gothic detail of the spire was cut from dry wood, air-dried wood, and it would have originally also been made from green wood. Here we have Rick Brown of Hans House shaking hands with Philippe Villeneuve and Remy Fremont there in the background. Basically, when the truss was at the Millennium Gate there in Atlanta, it got the attention of some folks that are part of the International Monuments organizations. And these these are the principal architects involved in the reconstruction of the roof, got wind of it, and we're in the United States already to be at some other meetings, and we're very excited to come and take a look at it. They were, as the architects were, many discussions were being had about how true they were going to do this reconstruction, because as with any, the roof took a couple generations to complete. Many things were corrected as they went along. Things were added later on, whether or not they were to hoist chandeliers up into the ceiling or create walkways and things like that. So while we have many here, kind of medieval construction, there were also many things added after the fact. Notre Dame kind of represents a change in tooling and a change in approach. For instance, that diagonal brace there is actually clasped on two sides by those posts, and it's not just socketed into a mortise. A lot of the earlier representations of cathedrals and abbeys and roof systems, the joinery was designed to be able to cut with axes. Not very much in the way of closed mortises, because that was the tools that they were used to using. Yes?
What you said about the construction taking a long time is super interesting. So if you're trying to restore something, what do you shoot for? Do you shoot for the way it was built, the day it was done, that done thing kind of could be a whole 100 years, or do you shoot to restore something the way it looked before the fire?
It was absolutely a very important question, and one that was very well considered. It was just decided to reconstruct it as it had been prior to the fire. This was the workshop I was working in primarily. It is in the Loire Valley in Troyes, the Asselin company, primarily working on French monument structures. The reconstruction of the roof of Notre Dame was, for many of the carpenters that I was working with, was the closest they had come to new construction. This is the kind of company that they raised the roof of Versailles 1 meter so that they could fit modern HVAC systems in there and things like that. And there on the right, you can see the timber that we were using. This was timber left over from the reconstruction of Lafayette's frigate that they had done, and it had been slabbed, stickered, and air drying for about 8 years. It was decided to be reconstructed with dried material because as you'll see, some of the Gothic details that we were executing were pretty ornate. My sweet spot is definitely heavy timber construction. And so I thought I'd be joining this crew here. But at the end of the day, the folks that were involved in the reconstruction of the structural elements of the spire were representing 4 different companies and had a very complex contract. And the timber that was part of that was all very expensive stuff. It was kind of my perfect fear that I'd be learning how to do fine carving on Notre Dame. Yeah. Thankfully, Michael Burry was there with me, and he's a highly skilled individual. As we were told that we didn't need to bring our own work clothes or our own tools, all those things are provided. French workshops, everybody wears a uniform, and they have a kind of a library that you check tools out from and things like that. Michael insisted on bringing a bunch of his hand tools and axes and all sorts of Michael Burry stuff that I was cursing at him about, trying to haul it through the Paris subway. The spire that was reconstructed of Notre Dame was part of the renovation work instigated by the French government, kind of after actually the publishing of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. During the French Revolution, the spire had been removed. A lot of the heads of any apostle or saint or anything that looked anything king-like had been knocked off. At one point in time, they had a sole candle burning in the center, and it was in celebration of the goddess of reason. And then it just became a storehouse for the government at some point. Eugene Viollet-le-Duc ended up being the principal architect for the reconstruction. And at that time, there was no spire on Notre Dame. If you're able to see very closely in the picture, though, that you can still see the structure of the spire underneath the roof. The spire's reconstruction happened just about 10 years before the construction of the Eiffel Tower, just to kind of put it in context and so we can understand the kinds of tools a little bit that they were using at the time, what they had available to them. The elements of the spire would have been, rather than being hand-hewn, they were cut on some sort of up and down, probably water-driven saw system. Many of them were bolted together. And there's a very obvious transition between the medieval portions of the roof and Viollet-le-Duc's reconstruction. The hand-hewn trusses, I'll share some more of that later, were again hand-hewn, and in the reconstruction of the spire, they pretty much used the tools that are available to us this day in the reconstruction of that. The elements of La Flèche, you can see here on the very bottom the tabouret, which is where the big load of the spire lands on the stone structure, and then the souche, where the valleys are all coming together there, and the green portion there with the containing the ornate balustrade, quadrifoils, trefoils, and high-peaked Gothic gables was the elements that I was working on. We can see the apostles there traveling down the valleys. They had been removed just about 5 days prior to the fire to be cleaned up. So they all were a very near miss there. And here we can see just some of the structural elements of the heavy.
Original, or were they? So during the revolution, they survived the revolution?
Yeah, I would have to dig in on that. I don't know the minutia of that. Okay. I don't know what would have been up there prior, but the same workshop, the same individuals in the workshop that were instrumental in creating the Statue of Liberty that was the same workshop that constructed those. So those would have been of that period or shortly thereafter. Here we can see the steps, and those were some of the, and there on the left, some of the drawings of the detailed work that I was taking part in. Here we can see just some of the research that was done and some of the materials that they had available to them for architects and engineers to be able to put together the drawings of these things and decide how it was all going to go together. Viollet-le-Duc was a prolific drawer, and many of his drawings were still available. Truss types as derived from Rémy Frémont's drawings. Again, the folks that were doing the reconstruction of the trusses had to reproduce errors and flaws, and they really wanted them to be reproduced as they had been created. Yeah.
Well, so kind of on that subject, how well did the limestone that it's landing on survive the fire? Did they have to do any masonry work prior to you guys?
Yeah, the bulk of the damage to the masonry was in the arches. The trusses themselves land on a really heavy timber sill that sits on top of the masonry. And as they were clearing that charred, destroyed material out, they discovered that the whole top course of the masonry of Notre Dame had been pinned together with basically big log dog looking staples. They had excavated holes and dug a trough, put an iron staple in there, and then poured lead into it so that the whole top course was actually stitched together. And I think when they saw that, they kind of realized that there was more going on in there than they understood. And my layperson's assumption was that that made it a pretty easy decision to replace the roof in kind, because they knew how much the material weighed. They knew it had lasted 900 years, and why mess with a good thing? In my understanding, yep, absolutely. At that stage, and even until now, kind of in some ways, the whole site is a very controlled access toxic zone. So I didn't get to see a lot of the fire cleanup and that kind of work, other than individuals there that were still doing the very kind of meticulous vacuuming and cleaning of the stained glass. So a lot of the surfaces in there were pretty dramatically damaged. And it was amazing to watch somebody in there with, you know, if with Q-tips, and at the end of the day, if they did like 1 square foot, their day was done. I just couldn't do that. I could not do that. But bless them, bless them. Yeah, lots of very, very detailed work. Another great thing. Yes, sir.
Just looking at these designs, from an engineering, like a modern engineering perspective, how over or underbuilt is something like that? Like, could you take every beam, reduce it by 1/2, and it'll still be fine? Any feel for it? Like,
That's a good question. It looks just about right to me. Looks good for my house. Standing on top of the scaffolding up just beneath the rooster of Notre Dame, the scaffolding is a whole other thing. Those folks are the ones that actually made money on the job, I'm sure. But standing on the scaffolding with 1 finger, you can push the top of the spire, and you can really get it going. With 1 finger.
Wait,
Yeah, the scaffolding's not going
No,
anywhere.
the scaffolding's moving. Which
The scaffolding's not going anywhere. No, the scaffolding was incredibly solid. But I would imagine that if it didn't do that under a wind load, then all of that is getting transferred down to the stone, and they don't know entirely what's going on in there, and they probably don't want to mess with it at all. This is the result of a point cloud work, where basically they take a spinning laser and some reflectors and put them in a building space, and let the laser spin around and tell you where all the reflectors are and all the surfaces are, and then you move the laser and it identifies how it's moved in relationship to that reflector, et cetera. And this was Andrew Tallon from Vassar College did this as he was doing work. He passed right before the restoration work was happening. But he was another really beneficial piece of research that it wasn't intended to be instrumental in the reconstruction, but it ended up being. And you can see here some of the irregularities in the walls. The ridge of Notre Dame was not a straight ridge, and it's not straight today either. It was reconstructed with its irregularities intact and in place. Again, some illustrations of some of the drawings that the architects had to work with, and a shot of the earlier scaffolding, which I'm very grateful that I didn't have to navigate. Here we start looking at some of the work that I was taking part in. For every element that was reconstructed for Notre Dame, prototypes had to be fabricated and put before review by a government board, and they would either advise that it was good to go or that small details needed to be changed. And so even while I was working in the workshop, and we had a fixed deadline, July 30th was the last day we were working, we were still adding, we were still having things reviewed and approved and adding to our workload without any extension of the amount of time that we had available. So while we were there, the days got longer. In order to take part in the work, you had to commit to whatever it took to getting it done in time. Some of the highly detailed drawings that we were working from here. And this was where we were in the shop when Michael and I started, was working on those the stumps that the apostles stand on there, with some of Michael's very fine woodworking tools that at the end of the day we were all very thankful to have. In the workshop, as mentioned, we needed to commit to full days in there, so I assumed that the work on Notre Dame would be an all-hands-on-deck type situation, but half the workshop at any given time was still engaged in other monument restoration work. So our 10 o'clock sharp coffee break that we took every day, and don't sit down, and I'm not sure why we couldn't sit down, but my French is quite poor at this point. I can ask where the router is and things like that, but My family came in 1650 as Huguenots, French Protestants, and settled with the Dutch in New Paltz. So around New Paltz, they do say DuBois, but in France, you don't say DuBois. So super cool to be able to, watch the progress of other craftspeople in the shop working on stuff like that. This was how the work came together. Part of the balustrade there, of which there was just so much of this material. And you can see it there at the bottom getting assembled and then fit together like that. So from the Loire Valley is kind of central western France. And Briey is where the workshop was, where the other heavy timber construction was taking place. And so by the time we put these assemblies together, we'd ship them to Briey in order to be fit into the larger assemblies in the shop. There you can see some of the tools that they had available for us, those steel-handled chisels and the tannins and the oak. On a French summer day, your hands would just get black. Everything would just, like you're trying to intentionally stain something. And if you did this a whole bunch, then, you'd go in for lunch and yeah, plenty indeed. Little shot of detail of how some of this stuff was coming together. Those kind of highly figured pieces, some of which were coming off of shapers and being hand finished. And you can see there the pegs holding the tenons in place inside of their little.
They give you some power tools?
On the reconstruction of the spire specifically, yep. On the reconstruction of the trusses as well, they used some power tools, but those all have finish hewn surfaces, but they most certainly had mortisers employed and things like that.
What were the prototypes made of? So you're creating an entire prototype, exactly what's going to be built in this lovely,
Yep.
to obtain French oak.
Yep.
So what was the material for the prototype? Same stuff?
It was the same stuff. At one point in the shop, we built a really large prototype of the structure of the spire so that we could place some of those little stumps that the apostles stand on and fit in some of the work that we had been doing. I have a picture of him in a little bit here, but General Georges Long was kind of the nationwide cheerleader and driver for the project. And at one point he was doing a tour of all of the shops that were working on it. And that tour was, it came with a bunch of media and speeches and whatnot. So we had actually constructed just out of like SPF type stuff, a mock-up of the structure of the spire itself so that we could place our French oak Gothic elements into that and they could see how it was coming together.
Another quick question is when you had, a board of directors, board of aesthetic directors that said, I need a couple of changes
Yeah.
here. And by the way, there's no change in the deadline.
Yeah.
Was there any pattern to the type of things that they wanted you to adjust? Or was it random according to the piece and the location?
No, it was like the size of profiles, the thicknesses of profiles, things like that. Yeah, yeah. The depth of a sweeping surface and mostly compared back to the original notes when they made those decisions.
That actually is a good question. So was that based off of what they thought the original depths were?
Yep.
Or after 100 years of wind abrasion and that type of stuff, which one did they go with?
Yeah, what they thought they were based on the drawings.
On the drawing?
Yep, yep. The entire roof of Notre Dame was and is clad in lead. And so I don't know what they were seeing up there when they were doing their inspections, and I don't know how much of the lead that they were removing, or I don't know when the last time was that somebody got up there and pulled the lead off and looked at what was there, and what the tooling marks were. I would think that for sure a lot of the finish work would have been done with hand tools, and I bet it was all done with green wood at that time as well. So who knows how much it moved, and a little video there. There's a lot of what our work days looked like. Pretty close quarters. Jackson in his man bun stage. Yeah. Back when all the hair was there. And again, just some of the details headed out the door. To answer your question, they're behind the, seeing the material once, our constructions, once they were installed on site, they had installed some moment frames behind things. And how the top of this right here is held together with some bolts. That is to make that more of a structural piece to tie it into some moment frames. Moment just being the, you know, the force applied to the base of a thing when it's pushed on, to put it really crudely. Content, great guy. There were a couple young people in the shop who spoke English and were excited to be able to use it. When we showed up there, we really had no idea how we would be received. The owners of the company were excited to have us there as international ambassadors. The guys in the shop didn't really understand who these American guys were or why they were there. Did we think we were better than them? Did we, you know, think we were going to show them something? Or so I was actually pretty afraid that we were going to end up kind of wallflowers in the shop. But it wasn't the case.
Is there a selection process to get you into that position?
Yes, absolutely. So in Atlanta, the company that I was working with, Aslan, has a window and door company. And so some of the owners of that shop were able to come and meet with some folks from the International Monuments organizations, as well as Rick and Laura Brown from Hans House Studios. And in Hans House style, we were hoping we could bring, you know, 60 young people who had no idea what they were doing over to work on Notre Dame. It wasn't happening, though. Yeah, it was decided that Michael, as instructor at the North Bennett Street School, and myself, as at the time I was president of the board of the Timber Framers Guild, it was decided that our skill sets, as well as our connections to and commitment to educational woodworking, that we would be fair candidates for it. So, but we did have to submit CVs and portfolios and apply. The French company had to post the jobs locally to make sure that there was nobody else available. I did go through the apprentice program in the Timber Framers Guild, and so I was able to take kind of the curriculum of the apprentice program and present it like a CV. And so at the end of the day, yeah, I got a French work visa in my passport.
How long were you all in France
For this was a 3-month contract. So it was in 2023, and it ended in July.
So you were there for 3 months.
Yep, I've been able to return quite a few times since then and get on site and see the progress of the work, but
But not to work.
not to work, no.
So when you left, somebody else took your place? I mean, that.
In the workshop, Michael and I were often discussing that it didn't look to us like they were going to get the work done, and so we kind of extended ourselves like, hey, if you need us for a little bit longer, we can talk about it. And they were like, that's not an option, actually. So at the end of towards the closer we got to the end of our contract, the longer the work days got. And at the day that we were wrapping it up and leaving was the day that the final assembly was being shipped off to Briey. So that was the French work setup is very different than the American way. There were many young people coming in for very, very short contracts, and they were just early in their careers and moving from shop to shop. Somebody from either the Compagnons de DuBois, the Companions of Duty, that kind of oversee many different trades, timber framing being one of the oldest and well-established, would come in and they'd spend a week studying the overhead, like the bridge crane, or and safety around that, or they'd be charged with, you know, replacing a rafter tail, and somebody would actually come in and grade them on that work. The employee has a contract with the company, and the company has a contract with the employee, and it goes both ways. If it's interrupted by either party, then there's a government body that you appeal to, and yeah.
You haven't used the word, but I'm reading in between the lines. They are unionized.
If anything, it's, yes, they're unionized, but it's more like the rights of both parties are enshrined at the government level.
That the government.
At the government level, like you don't, like there was one day where in the shop, a coworker came and asked us to give him our pay stubs because they felt like the contract wasn't being recognized when it came to overtime. And I had kind of fudged a little bit when I set my rate, and I knew I was making more than some of the other guys in the shop, and I knew that they would like go for that because it was still of value to them to have. And we're not talking much here, but nonetheless, it was very unusual to have a coworker be asking for my pay stub, especially in the U.S. We're used to like not talking about wages and stuff like that. So it was a little bit of a negotiation there. At the end of the day, we did share with them, and they got things sorted out. I have no idea what happened, but they got a raise, yeah. So here you can see on the right some what I'm calling butterfly splines, which held these large quadrifoil assemblies were double-sided with overlapping pieces, and there you can see the dado running down the center that also had kind of a dovetail built into it, or a butterfly. And so these pieces here that I made many, many meters of stock of were then covered in paraffin and pounded in to tie the front and back of the assembly together. And there you can see all of the stress and strain required to get some of the early ones together. That's a full-sized sledge there. And then just some of the workshop flow going on. And here's one where we were actually working on a jig for the bandsaw to be able to complete this work. And Michael asked the shop lead if he could use his French hewing axe to show how it would have been done early on. And what you can't see there is the full half circle of the shop crew that were all very certain that he was going to screw it up majorly. At this point in time, this piece has, it's got, 4 different contours on it, all of different radii. And basically the first task was to make a block of a very specific size. And then that was brought over to plans that were either drawn in full scale or just a printed plan set, depending on the size of the piece. And then the dimensions of the piece were brought up onto it from there. Very different from looking at a plan set, taking a tape measure. It really, like nothing was, you didn't inch anything because you were pretty much lofting everything off of a full-scale drawing. The wood was those logs in the yard was the wood. So we had the wood there.
You were just one of many shops.
I was, but this shop exclusively did this work, the Gothic detail. There was like, when it came to the circular columns that went from the Gothic detail down to the balustrade, that was a different shop. So we knew kind of exactly where we needed to leave things. Yep.
So what was the final finish that you guys defined once you were done with it, or did you just leave it open for a year?
It all left the shop raw.
It all went
Yep.
raw.
Yep. Not even in the end grain ceiling. It was just in French habit. I brought it up. I was like, aren't we going to close this end grain with some wax or something? Because it would be absolutely standard here. And they're like, what are you talking about? No, no. Yeah. Another difference was like the drilling of holes for pegs. They were quite comfortable just blasting through here we would like go carefully until your lead screw goes and loses its bite and then turn it over and finish it so it's all clean, and they just wanted to blast everything through and then come back and fix it later. So here on the left in that image you can see the corner of a chain mortiser as well as a 16-inch beam saw, but there were plenty of opportunities to use traditional tools. That's a bis aigu. Early medieval French joinery tool meant for standing over the material just like he is there. It has different types of chisels on each end for cutting the side grain or cleaning the corners on things. The biggest thing probably was just that at the end of the day this is all covered in lead. But it all left the shop looking absolutely perfect. And I understand that. In part it was because the a lot of the carpenters that I was working with in this shop were kind of juniors to the carpenters that were taking part in the heavy timber construction, and they wanted to impress them. So a ton of work went into a lot of detail that was not necessary, but still felt good to do. As I was cleaning a mortise, wondering how I fit into this shop, I saw folks struggling with this very large shaper. Some of the knives sticking out of there much farther than they should be, with some very large block material, the dry oak with deep curves in it. So, you know, you'd start off a cut with just wonderful falling grain, cutting like butter, but by the time you got to the end of that thing, it really wanted to push. And somebody looked at me, looking at them, and was like, "Can you do this?" And I was like, "I don't know, probably." Timber framer, it was an unusual tool for them to be using in this. It's much more of a tool for in the millwork shop. Coming from a high production timber frame company using power tools, we used to put Makitas on XY axis, chainsaws on all sorts of crazy stuff. So I felt like at least I could keep from hurting myself on it. Also, a lot of, when people are pushing through these blades, they're having to push directly from the back. And if it does kick out, they had big plywood barriers all around this tool so that if the knife broke or a piece flew off or something, it wouldn't brain somebody else in the shop. Thanks to my stature, I was able to work it from the top, keep my eye on the blade and on the material. And thanks to that, was tasked with doing a great deal of this kind of production work. It's like running a table saw. There's no time, or you can't be thinking of anything else. It was quite exhausting, but I just remind myself at the end of every day that I was putting the contours on the Paris skyline there. And I heard a lot of comments like, I see you're not afraid to lose a finger. And it was never lost on me that I was representing my American woodworking community in this. This is not typical timber framing, this portion of it. And so really leaning into what I learned from my mentors, etc. And here we are very proudly celebrating some of our most significant finished work there before it was bundled up and shipped off to the other side of the country.
How many pieces like that did you end up doing in total?
Yeah, I think those big ones there are 4 of them. Yeah, there were 4 of them. But there were also a lot of other kind of more minor. The balustrade just kind of kept going on forever. There was a ton of that stuff. I don't even know. He passed right before the completion of the project, but and here you can see behind us some of the elements of that mock-up that we did. General Jean-Louis Georges Long died on his birthday hiking the Pyrenees, but when he came to visit us there, we weren't sure whether or not we were supposed to be in the background hiding, we had no idea. But he really enjoyed celebrating us, along with the notion that carpenters were coming from all over the world to learn from the very best in the world. And he called Michael Boston, and he called me New York. So it was a good moment. Yes, there were times when we would be paired up with a junior individual in the shop because he spoke English. And there was one kid in particular that took like a full week to wrap his head around the fact that we weren't brand new carpenters or retired carpenters, or we were actually working people in the craft. And he would try to direct us in all sorts of minute ways that were totally unnecessary and a little bit frustrating. Yeah. I don't remember the real specifics of it, but it was a lot of details surrounding how clean the bottom of a mortise should be, or these kinds of things.
Well, it had to show up in what you accomplished.
Yeah. At the end of the day, especially as you get closer to August in France, you get fewer and fewer people working. They take the month of August off pretty typically. And there was, like the last 2 weeks, actually, it was just Michael Burry and I were running the shop. Which was awesome. It was cool to look around and be like, I guess what's up to us. Yeah. And really leaning in on the language of carpentry. You know, not doing any sort of trying to translate from inches and feet to metric or anything like that. Just going with what's in front of you. And yeah.
When it was just the two of you, could you sit down and drink coffee?
We didn't try. No. Yeah, there was a little espresso machine in the corner, and usually the most junior person in the shop, about 15 minutes before break time, would be over there just like cranking out espresso. And yeah, I remember the first time I just tried to like lean on a sawhorse. It was like, no. But lunch was an hour and a half long. Like, what are you going to do? Like, go do your banking and grocery shopping? And there was a compagnon that wore the full outfit there and had a understudy with him who came and picked up a part of the contract and set up just in another building. And this guy we saw all over France. He worked in every single workshop. He just wanted to be part of it. When I went back for the opening, he was taking tickets at the door. It was hilarious. But he picked up some very complicated parts of the project, and Michael Burry was instrumental in some of this really cool stuff here. And here you can see the finished work as it's in the other workshop in Briey. They're being fit in. This workshop, I think it had been a car manufacturing plant or something like that, but the complexity of the bridge cranes and things like that, you could pick up an object from one corner and bring it to the other corner all overhead. It was really cool. You can see here the layer of plywood they have on the ground there, again, to facilitate their method of scribe layout. Everything's snapped out in chalk on the floor. This is what's called the needle, which is the centermost piece of the spire that carries all the way up and the rooster sits on. And it was so cool just to see it there with all of its facets on it. I think there's at least 2 pieces of wood here, and you can spot a joint coming up here. It doesn't blank out on you, sorry. There it is, yeah. And here, pond created out back where they were leaving whole trees soaking in there. Everything was covered with kind of a military style tent canvas stuff, and they had sprinklers out there just to keep all of the material wet and from moving too quickly. And here you can see on the end that little plywood tab there meant to orient the piece in its layup so that they know exactly what face they're working on, what material they're bringing into it, etc. Yes?
Was the distributed approach to the restoration, is that typical of what the original construction was? Or did they do like everything on site? Or was it distributed out?
I would say that with the proximity to the Seine, the river there, a lot of the work still would have been done outside of Paris, but the outside of Paris was a lot closer at that time. And I think part of the origins of, say, the Compagnon as an organization would have been that when some sort of work like this became available, different teams of carpenters would show up and fight about it. At some point in time, it was decided that they would, instead of fighting, they would choose their best carpenters and create what's called a maquette or a model. And whoever had created the best model would be the crew that would get the work. So I don't think it was nothing like the kind of distribution for the timber framing part alone. I think it was at minimum, it was 4 companies. And it wouldn't have been like that originally, I don't think. This is one of few instances, or on the major construction of the trusses, leaving the marks, the marriage marks with race knives was very cool. In our workshop, we were doing a lot with color-coded pens and things like that, but still, nonetheless, the marriage marks were something that the original carpenters would have recognized. There was work that was on our to-do list that we were waiting for drawings on, that the drawings were being completed in-house, and that those drawings had to be bounced back and forth between architects and engineers a great deal before the solutions were decided on. This is the workshop in Normandy of the company DuBois. And in this workshop, there was a bunch of the folks from the Carpenters Without Borders project in Maine, as well as both French and American. So this is the workshop where the bulk of the other Americans were working, and it was on the reproduction of the trusses themselves. And here you can see them doing a full layup, test fitting, especially inscribing. Test fitting is an essential part of that, and there's not really room to do that sort of messing around in downtown Paris. So it's all done in the workshop. It was very cool to see young people that I had met in Maine who were there in their scout uniforms, now on a very professional, on the job side of the century, carrying their own weight, you know. It was very cool. Again, they raised tents and did full-scale raisings in Normandy before it was even before everything was disassembled and shipped into the heart of Paris. Being able to be on a job site where traditional craftspeople, where it was a traditional trades job site. You had everybody in there from stonemasons to people doing gilding work, timber framers, folks taking care of the stained glass. I don't know if one issue that happened with all of the water that went on top of the vaults was it started to, the salts in the stone began to migrate onto the surface. And the surface of that limestone began to spall and come off in bulk. And the solution was to put a poultice on the underside of everything to slow down that movement. And it was actually very successful and saved the finished surfaces in there. Walking to the end of that job site and peeking through a big plastic tarp and finding yourself face to face with the rose window. It's one of those moments where you're like, yeah, this is my sacred space, and it is. The lines were very, very blurred, but just amazing. A lot of these temporary support pieces were constructed directly from those point cloud drawings that had been made. So they were able to do this emergency shoring work without having to go in and do any measurements at all. It was pretty interesting to see like the yard where these things came from and where they were being returned to. You know, massive acreage of these bolted together support things. The scaffolding underneath the spire when they were, yeah, you couldn't see through it. You couldn't walk through it. It was just incredibly dense and everywhere. But being able to see some of the timber framing in the bell towers that did survive was a real honor. Here we are on the bell towers looking down. For the length of this project, the two largest cranes in Europe were on site for the entirety of it. Here on the right, you can barely make out the barge on the Seine that's bringing in the trusses that mark the beginning of Eugene Viollet-le-Duc's reconstructed spire. And there on the left, some very large LVLs that are part of very large work surfaces where they're doing the pre-assemblies on site. I would think that they probably employed some of those kind of human squirrel cage type cranes. I mean, they were able to lift stuff right out of the river. And we've got, I don't know if you, there are very large cranes that a person or two people get in and walk and turn a large wheel, and it's all just gears and ratios and block and tackle. Not too dissimilar from how, you know, we raised the truss by hand. It's 36 foot tall, massive thing, and with the right pick points and block and tackle, it's very possible. Here we can see that arrow being installed. This is the apse, the easternmost portion of the cathedral. I did not have any part in this construction, but it was just such a cool thing to be able to see that all radiating out. On the eastern, the apse is typically the easternmost portion of any cathedral. So if you're walking around in a medieval place with a cathedral and see its orientation, you can kind of orient yourself to the whole compass. But this space towering over the Paris skyline was absolutely sacred. Going up there and seeing something so humble as the shave horse was really stunning to me. Just the process of getting it up there. It meant somebody, the thing bounced around in a van down the Paris streets and came through security and got on an elevator, and just the fact that it was like useful. It's not even a very nice one, but like it was absolutely essential for them to, finish the construction of all of these kind of keyed layups and things like that. Yep.
Is that temporary pegging? I was looking at the metal.
Yeah, there's little pieces of hose there because the pegs are all hand drawn, so they've got a real solid point on them. So that's just to keep you from scraping your head on it. And then to be able to see the materials that we had fabricated being installed. Again, something I was able to witness, but was not a direct part of, just because you're directing a crane over a head mic, but you can see some of the square washer plates in there again, where they're installing kind of after the fact moment structures. Here we can see some of the detail of the lead cladding as it's going in there, and the gentleman there that's doing that work was explaining it, thinking that we were just tourists, and when he found out there was a couple of us that were part of the construction of that stuff, he was very apologetic. But it's just part of the deal. I kind of assume this is built to mimic stone, but was a much lighter weight solution. But even on Notre Dame and other cathedrals, we have spires all over the place that are constructed of stone.
So what would you guess the thickness of that cladding is, the lead?
3 mil.
3 mil.
Yep.
3 mil.
Yep. And there's only, in order for it to maintain its, I'm not a metallurgist here, so I'm just going to I'm going to butcher it. It's like tensile strength in order to fit all these fine contours. When it's rolled, it changes the properties of the sheet good, so that moving it a bunch will actually make it brittle and start to break. So there's only one workshop in the country, it's in England, that still casts lead sheets.
And these are cast pieces?
Those are cast. The back has the imprint of the sand bed on it. Cast lead. Cast lead sheet. And so on site, they have a ton of traditional lead workers that are doing, they have all sorts of little mallets and tools really specific to it. It's very much a flashing. So they're very mindful of its layering and all those things. They're shutting down areas where people are actually doing the welding and creating noxious fumes. There were literally guys up there with big pots on a hot plate to recast the top of the masonry to fill those back with lead, do that kind of repair. So even long after the cleanup work had been done, it was still a lead safe zone. And so you had to wear a full, unless you had work clothes that were on the dirty side and your other clothes on the clean side, then you had to put on a full Tyvek suit and wash your boots and all that kind of stuff. This was seeing the space fully enclosed back in February, and just getting to see all of that. And at this point, I think they have like every 2 hours on the hour, there's a whole station up there for people to go through and make physical, visual inspections of things regularly. In this on the left, you can see some of the new fire suppression system that was installed, which is a mist system and really designed to create a high pressure water mist that creates more of an oxygen-free environment rather than just dumping water on everything. The light hitting that hand-hewn stuff is sure gorgeous. Only time in our lives that we'll ever be able to see the spire of Notre Dame half-clad, and it reminds me a little bit of like the signage around Moulin Rouge, where you've got somebody, a petticoat lifted. I thought it was very cool. Here we have Eugene Viollet-le-Duc cast himself as Doubting Thomas. or the Apostle Thomas, I don't know, looking up at the spire. All of the other apostles are looking down over the city. This is in the Musée des Cités, which was where these things were stored after the restoration of them was complete. And there on the left, it's my understanding that he did this right before the scaffolding came down. Philippe Villeneuve cast himself looking back down at Viollet-le-Duc. When I was there, in one of the more, we had heard that there was a scroll in the new Le Coq, the rooster, very much a symbol of Paris. And here we have the original on the right and the reproduced, the new version there on the left with some elements of a phoenix in it. And we had heard that some names were involved and were placed in that of the workers on site. When I was there visiting, I could hear a young woman who was giving a tour from the government restoration endeavor say the word Michael Jackson. And to her people that she was giving the tour to, and when we were there, when we first showed up, there was a bunch of things marked Michael Jackson. The guys in the shop thought it was very funny and cool that Michael Jackson was coming. My last name is very French. My first name is not French at all. And so I asked my friend to translate and ask her what was going on with that. And she said that she was actually the one that was tasked with cross-checking the names on a scroll that are in the rooster along with some other religious artifacts. And she came across the name Michael Jackson on the scroll and thought that can't be right. And so it was actually, I just happened to be right there with the woman who had been tasked with ensuring that the names were correct. And she was able to make sure that our names were properly reflected in the Le Coq on top of Notre Dame. Like a chunk of the crown of thorns and some other things like that are reported to be in there. But there you can see on that plate there's two of them. There's one on each breast, and inside of them there's a tube, and in one side it's a scroll with about 2,000 names of the workers that took part in that chicken. That chicken's about that big. That chicken's about that big. There's a fair bit online. The ceremony, it was a very ceremonious day and a whole thing when they set this thing in place. The one on the right there, while the rest of the spire crashed down to the floor of Notre Dame, as it came down, it actually, because it is like a weather vane, it was just a gravity fit up there. It actually launched well out of the way of the fire, and was able to be found after the fact. Yeah, they actually left it in the condition that it's in right now, and it's still available to be seen in the Musée des Cités. And I think throughout the reconstruction, there was a lot of discussion about what should be or what can be updated. And I think that they really limited themselves to a couple of lower visibility stained glass windows that will be brand new, as well as Le Coq. That's my story of my experience working on the reconstruction of Notre Dame.